Hi, Nebraska. This is Jeannie with Nebraska for Founders Values. And today we are going to talk with Doug Kagan, who is I don't know, Doug, are you the leader of the Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom? Is that your role? You're the leadership
I'm the
guy?
president. I'm the president.
Awesome. So we're going to talk about taxes with um, all the tax issues going on with Nebraska, and Nebraska being one of the highest taxed states in the country. And Nebraska for Founders Values, we just did a meeting in the Werner Chamber that we were talking about the EPIC option and had Dr. Ernie Goss give his opinion about Nebraska taxes and maybe what needs to happen and whether EPIC is an option. But today we're going to get Doug Kagan's perspective on what the Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom, what their group is doing. And here at NFFV, we like to bring people to the forefront that are people that Nebraskans need to know about. So welcome, Doug, and maybe you can tell people a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, thank you, Jeanne. Our Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom group has been around since 1978. We concentrate on three main issues: taxes, spending, and government regulation. We're a statewide group. We have members all over the state across Nebraska, but we're centered here in Omaha. And we have a number of projects, which we call watch projects. You mentioned one before, University Watch. We have City Watch, County Watch, and several others. And what we do is we analyze taxing authorities, budgets, and other financial matters in these local and state taxing authorities. And we train our members to be individual lobbyists so they can go to city council meetings or legislative hearings and testify as taxpayers.
That's awesome. So I know we've referenced your group before when we were looking at all the CRT that's in the university system, and you guys in your organization had put together a lot of the money that's spent just on that initiative at the colleges. And that was great information that we were glad to put out there for people.
Right. We do periodic issue papers on our University Watch project. We found that on the various campuses of our universities here in Nebraska, the administrations are spending literally millions of dollars, not thousands, but millions of dollars on diversity, equity, and inclusion, CRT, and hiring staff and putting out indoctrination classes for the students. And at the same time, the university is begging for more taxpayer dollars. So we've testified at the legislature on why the university system should not get as much money as it does receive from state taxpayers unless it does away with its CRT curricula. They actually have, on some campuses, have cut core classes like geography when they could save those classes and get rid of DEI instead.
Right, right. Well, that's probably a whole nother conversation for another time is how do you take back the universities? But today I want to just shift gears a little bit. We really want to talk about taxes. So a lot of the grassroots and people, well, actually just every Nebraskan should be feeling the high inflation that's going on with property taxes and just taxing and the cost of goods. Everybody's feeling the pinch. And so Nebraska is finding itself in quite a dilemma here. And people are not really wanting tax relief and shifting the tax burden. They're wanting a tax overhaul. And the EPIC people have their plan. And what does your group think is a great idea? Are you more along the lines of a flat tax, or how do you think the overhaul needs to happen?
We work with the National Taxpayers Union and the Tax Foundation in Washington. And several years ago, the Tax Foundation, one of its fellows, put together a template for Nebraska showing which way Nebraska should go in tax trends. That would require a comprehensive tax overhaul. We looked at it, we thought it was a good template, we added some to it, And we feel that generally Nebraska should follow other states that are way ahead of us, that is moving away from major reliance on property and income taxes towards consumption taxes. And when I say consumption taxes, I mean plural. You're talking about excise taxes, nuisance taxes, sin taxes, occupation taxes, license taxes. A lot of people don't realize that before the income tax came into vogue in the 1800s, the federal government, a lot of states depended on these excise taxes and sales taxes to actually run their operations. And nowadays, there's states that actually depend up to 20% of the revenue on these excise and sales taxes. But when you're talking about a tax shift, it's if you're going to get the revenue you need for the state, everything is really a tax shift, because even consumption taxes are epic. You're shifting the tax load from income and property taxes to sales taxes and excise taxes. So what we're really advocating is to move away from major reliance on high local property taxes, put more of the burden on the state, and the state can go rely more on consumption taxes and sales taxes, nuisance taxes, et cetera. And instead of having like a 5% state sales tax that we have now, if you expand it to all of these services, you could lower the tax rate to 2%. So really, the outcome would be exactly what the epic people like, and that is the more you use, the more you spend, and the more expensive you spend, the more tax you pay. So actually, that's going to help everybody, because the people in the lower socioeconomic groups, they won't have to pay so much tax because they don't buy so much. They don't buy luxury items, for instance. You have a stable middle class, and if the wealthy people have more expendable income, then they can buy more, but they pay more. So it's a graduated tax, just like the income tax is.
Right. So you're kind of along the same lines, like as a consumption-based kind of tax system. Is that kind of what your group is thinking?
Well, the difference is, what we're afraid of is that the way EPIC is put together, and it's never been adopted by any state in the union because they can't figure out how to do it. It would drive the revenue department nuts trying to figure out how much tax to charge. But you can do it a different way and just move to consumption taxes plural. So it's really the same principle. It's just done in a different way. And other states like North Carolina and Georgia have made it work with consumption taxes. So actually, you're not getting rid of the property tax entirely, but you're lowering it and capping it. You're not getting rid of the income tax entirely, but you're lowering that and capping it. So you really still have essentially a new three-legged stool, like Nebraskans like to refer to. You have property tax, you have income tax, and you have consumption taxes. But the big leg on the stool is no longer property tax, which it is now, because the stool has always been wobbly because we've had more property tax. So you move to a consumption tax base instead of a property tax base.
So the other thing with this tax is that people don't realize is if you went to a more simple tax system based considering what we have right now. So the tax system, if you really look about it, Senator Halloran had a nice optic that the current tax code is like 9 inches thick versus like a consumption-based tax. You could actually read it. It's only maybe an inch thick. The tax code is so complicated. I've even asked an accountant, said, do you know all the rules in the tax law? Well, no, there's no way I could know all of those. We only get it from the people at the top that read it, these few people, and then they just tell us what to do. So if our accountants can't even figure out the tax code, how can the average Nebraskan figure out the tax code?
Well, that's true. We're actually living with a tax code that was promulgated back in the 1800s, because when Nebraska was first founded as a state, there was a major reliance on property taxes because most people lived in rural areas on farms and ranches. Now that's not the case. Also, in past decades, we had a manufacturing society. Now we have a service sector society. So what tax best fits a service service society? That's consumption taxes.
Yeah. Well, and then part of that service thing and changing it to this is what a lot of people are talking about, is all the exemptions that are built into the tax structure right now. And a lot of those services, there is no tax on that. And then if you start looking, my conversation the other day was, well, did you know that all the financial institutions are, they are exempt from corporate income tax? Anybody that's in the financial industry. So why would we ever, give an exemption to a whole industry?
What's happened since, well, that last time there was a big change in our tax code was 1966. I think Norbert Tiemann was governor then. And there weren't all these exemptions for income taxes or sales taxes, but now we have what we call a Swiss cheese tax system because there's holes in it. If you look at every year in the legislature, some interest group is asking for sales tax exemption or an income tax exemption. So you add all these exemptions up since the last 75 years or so, and you have a wobbly tax system because there's so many holes in it, there's so many exemptions. And so it shouldn't work that way because you favor some sectors of society over other businesses. So what we would suggest is you look at the income and sales tax exemptions and you go to a 4-year plan. So year one, you'd remove 25% of their exemption. Year two, you'd remove 50%. Year three, you remove 75%. And in the fourth year, they wouldn't have any exemptions. So that way they could gradually figure out what they're going to do with their businesses or business sector because their exemptions would go away.
And has your group come up with a number like that is missed revenue from all these exemptions? Do you have a number? Does your organization, did they look into all of that?
Yes, but it's not current. It's about 8 years old, so it's not very reliable, but it adds up to actually millions and millions of dollars that's not being collected by the Department of Revenue.
Gotcha. Well, I know Nebraska. So speaking of like this service and then ways to bring in money, if you look at other states that are actually destination states, sometimes I think of like Six Flags in Texas. That's just something I thought of. Or you go to Florida. And a lot of these states put a lot of taxes there because then they're getting that revenue for people that are coming there for vacations or whatever. So here not to pick on the Henry Dorley Zoo, but here we've got one of the best zoos in the country, but that's exempt from any taxes. Would you not want to tax them to have people that don't live into the state pay into the state to pay for these kinds of like places to visit?
Well, sure, that's and I remember when that bill went through the legislature, they had a lot of lobbyists down there testifying, oh, we shouldn't be taxed because we're such a good attraction and we need our money to expand our facilities. Well, so does every other venture in Nebraska and the nation. So that's what happens when you have all these exemptions, and then the tax load goes on everybody else, which really isn't fair.
So is this the same thing that's going to happen? So you follow the legislature probably as close as I do, maybe even more. So this Good Life district that they just got a whole lot of money to build this. I believe that's the area in Gretna. And this Good Life district got this big tax decrease that their tax rate's only going to be like 2.5%. So again, would you not want that tax rate to be higher in that district if you're going to make that be a destination area? Did we not just do the opposite of what we should have done?
Absolutely. When you have these Good Life areas in Omaha, they have business enhancement areas. Then there's tax increment financing, which is totally out of whack because the whole idea for TIFs was to take areas that were really depressed economically, either urban or rural. Now they use any area they want to and put a TIF on it. And what that does is that puts property tax receipts in abeyance for like 15 or 20 years. They keep increasing it. So that means all the taxing authorities within 15 or 20 years aren't getting all the property tax revenue they should get. Um, with the enhancement areas, it's a little different because they can charge even more tax, but they get to keep it because they use it for whatever they want in that particular commercial area. The good life districts, it's the same thing. When you have commercial or industrial growth like that, normally it would bring in a lot more property tax. So if you designated a good life area, you're putting that tax revenue in abeyance for over the years, and they use that money to do whatever they want within that geographical area, but the tax revenue doesn't go to the local taxing authorities.
So in essence, what the people of Nebraska need to realize is that they're actually paying for that, correct?
Oh yeah, because the property tax load is going on the rest of us. And another bad thing that happens with these kind of districts is the cities or the counties will pump in money and say, well, if you develop this district, we'll put in all the infrastructure for you. We'll put in the streets, we'll put in the sewers, we'll put in the sidewalks. The developers should do that, and they're not doing it. So they save millions of dollars that way.
Wow. Wow. So really, my takeaway from all of that, what I have learned is that nothing is free. And if the government is giving all these, breaks or whatever, that's really on the back of the taxpayer.
That's right. It's really government favoritism.
That's exactly right. And I always think of the whole thing as, do we need the government to do this? Who is the best stewards of their money? The people are. So I guess my big overview on all of it is, if you don't tax the people so much, the people would probably take that money and go develop something themselves and be very good stewards of their money and probably do it at a fraction of the cost that the government would. Is that correct?
Sure, they could. I mean, for decades, developers developed all these districts by themselves with no public tax money, and their endeavors were successful. And if they couldn't do it themselves, then they failed. But there was no load on the taxpayers.
So how did we get from that to this? And then how do we get back to the people being able to do that without government subsidies?
Well, these public-private partnerships are really out of control. So actually, the only way to do away with those would be through the state legislature.
I feel like the public-private partnerships have gone in every industry. You see that in healthcare. You see that obviously in building. I'm not sure that there's one sector that they're not pushing the public-private partnership. Isn't that fascism?
Well, I don't know if it's fascism, but it's sure a burden on the taxpayers because you're getting hit two ways. The appropriate revenue is not coming back from these districts, and then your tax revenue is going into these districts, and you don't have anything to say about it.
Wow. It's like a black hole.
Oh yeah, it's getting worse.
It is. Okay, so now that we've kind of laid that all out, like where we are from the tax perspective on these districts and people are being taxed, the property taxing I think is really what's hitting home with a lot of people, that these taxes on property, even though people don't really talk about income tax, that's still a big part of it, but the property taxes are really hitting people hard and people are losing their homes. What I've noticed over the last couple of years, when property values were going up 30% year over year, people were showing up their city county buildings irate because they were getting taxed out of their homes. Do you see that like getting better anytime soon?
It won't get better until they change the law. And if you want to talk about LB388 now,
Yeah.
what that was proposed by the governor was absolute. Not only was it bad legislation, but it was presented in a very bad way because we found out after the fact that what was in the bill was not just the whole tax scheme. They were going to promote more of it year by year. So it would have been something done over several years. But what the governor really did, I think, is, first of all, he failed to listen to the people in his first working group that he put together last fall, because we've talked to some of these senators and the other interest groups that were involved, and they said that the governor didn't listen to them. So his big plan was just a major tax shift, just the sales tax. And instead of extending it to all services, he just picked out cherry-picked services like, veterinarians and accountants or whatever to hit them. And that's not how it's done. So now he's in a pickle because he put together a new working group of just about 21 senators. So in order to have a special session, they have to have at least 33 senators who agree to a special session. So you have to have 33 senators who are confident that something's going to happen. They've reached out to our taxpayer group, and we've put out together, well, over the years, we've assembled several white papers with suggestions and ideas for comprehensive tax reform. And now that we're zeroing in on property taxes, we put together a new 5-page white paper showing the legislature. It's kind of like a guide on what elements to put into a revenue bill so that you can lower the property taxes and at the same time have sufficient revenue. There'd be some budget cuts, but you'd have sufficient revenue to run the state government. And we're working with these senators now, presenting them. In fact, we have a meeting tonight with Senator Reapy. He's on the working group. I think they're going to meet this Friday for the first time. We're going to give him some ideas for property tax reform, as well as some other senators, and just see how these meetings go. There's supposed to be several working group meetings until the end of July, and then they'll decide if they have enough impetus for a special session.
Yeah. The things that I picked out, I think you did a good overview of LB833. It was a big shift. It was just an increase in taxes. Unlike the EPIC, it was not going to get rid of property taxes. The little minor details that I picked out in the bill are things that not NFFV, really supports, but I was looking at like CBD and hemp products just because that's my own personal industry. And the initial one was to tax that at 100%. And I was like, oh my gosh, we don't tax anything at 100%. I've never seen that, but they were going to do that. Well, then they backed it down to 25%. They were going to put a couple dollars more on cigarettes, of course, your sin taxes. But then they did something weird that they wrote in there with sugar. And another business owner was saying, well, sugar and sweets were going to get taxed, but then, but they didn't really specify. And then if it was corn syrup, that got exempted. So again, we're picking and choosing who gets to succeed and who doesn't. If you're going to give corn an exemption, but everything else gets taxed. And she's like, she couldn't understand how she was going to decide if she should tax one candy bar and not tax the next one.
I know the grocery industry was outraged. I don't blame them, because they wouldn't know what to charge a tax on and what not to charge a tax on. But again, we divided our white paper into several sections on what you do with valuation, because in our opinion, visualize a dandelion, okay? If you take your lawnmower and it's dandelion season, you cut off the top of the dandelion with the lawnmower, you can say, oh, dandelion went away, but it really did, because the root is still there and it's going to grow a new yellow dandelion. So you got to dig out the root. Same way you have to with tax reform. You can't have property tax reform unless you have property valuation reform. And this is something that people don't realize now. Like in urban areas, your home is taxed from 92 to 100% of market value. Well, it wasn't always that way. If you go back to 1930s, it was 35%, and then it was 50%. And it wasn't until Governor Nelson's tax administrator came into office and he said, I think it ought to be 92 to 100% of market value. And the legislature in 1995 passed it.
Wow, did they not read the bill?
Probably not. But the other thing is, once valuations are out of control, and there's a lot of ways to control it by, limiting the amount that is taxed from valuation. You can ratchet down from 92 to 100%, down to 80%. But the other thing in LB833 that we thought was very bad, they said, well, we put a cap on property taxes. It was like a Swiss cheese cap because there are several ways you could get around it. You could have petitioners. It would be very simple to get a petition together and to override the tax lid. Or taxing authorities could say there was an excuse for emergencies, but they didn't really define emergencies. So taxing authorities could declare anything an emergency and bust the tax lid. So you really are not going to make the property tax problem go away until you put a hard lid on property taxes.
Well, and to do that, as much as we like to criticize California, they did Prop 13 way back in the day. And unless you sold your property, they put that Prop 13 put a max of, what was it, maybe 1% or 3%. It was such a small amount. And if you did not sell your home, they could not tax you any higher than that amount until a new valuation came out, like if the home sold or what have you. And so that was a hard cap because I lived in California and those properties were priced at millions of dollars. And then of course, 09 hit and it just like tanked the whole thing. But Prop 13, as much as California might be crazy, maybe Nebraska should look at something like that.
There has to be some way to ratchet down property valuations and disconnect it some way from the way they tax based on valuations. And we have a wonderful Douglas County assessor here, Walt Peffer, and he's come up with some really good ideas that we've incorporated on so that the property tax load would not depend entirely on the way the valuation system is set, but you still have to change the valuation system. And once you do that, then you can proceed and reform the property tax system.
Yes. Well, then part of that is if we can do some reform, some reform on the valuations, then let's take that and then think further down the road is, can you cut government spending? So if you simplify everything, maybe you get rid of a lot of government entities per se, and that the government needs to be a whole lot smaller. So if valuations got easier and you're saying, well, maybe that assessor's office doesn't need to be so big. And then maybe with a flat consumption tax, maybe all these organizations in the government go away. That's how you're going to have to cut spending too, right?
Right. There's, and again, other states are way ahead of us. There's several good ways to cut government spending, and the governor actually did a good thing. He took all these vacant spots in state government that were not being filled, maybe because they didn't need to be filled. I know I worked for state government, and when computerization started, we didn't need so many people, so they just didn't fill spots. And I think he cut something like 1,000 spots out. So those are spots in state government don't need to be funded. Let's see, what else was I going to say? That slipped my mind. Well, go ahead.
Well, even with cutting government, like how else do you see that happening? Like in your guys' vision, long-term plan, how do we cut the size of government down and let the private sector just flourish? Because in good constitutional principles, it's all about limited government and letting the private sector take over things that the government is doing. And so how can we cut that government size and let the private sector do what it does best?
There's so many solutions, not only at the state but local level. What some states are doing is they put a cap on spending. They say, well, you can't spend any more money than the previous year plus the increase in the consumer price index. So say if the CPI for the Midwest went up 3% a year, they could increase their budget by 3%. And you can add population growth to that because you have more people to serve, government can serve. So you add that on. And that's a perfect limit for government spending. Another thing you can do is use privatization and save money at the state and local level. Here in Nebraska, we have, I didn't realize it, but there's actually counties in Nebraska that have more cows than people. And what you, that's true. I checked it.
That's awesome.
But the cows don't vote. So what you have to do is each county has its local government. We could merge county services, have interlocal services. That would work to a certain extent, but you can't do that with all rural counties because people would have to drive too far to get county services. But you know, if you have like snow plowing, you could have two counties go together instead of having two separate departments. So you don't need so many public servants that way.
Yeah. And that would be a nice way to do it. It's like this duplication of services. And, you know, this is a total side note. I just went to the Waverly meeting because there was a $90 million bond for school for Waverly School District. And so I went and to see what they were wanting to do. And they were wanting to actually just duplicate a lot of the services that Southeast Community College does. And as taxpayers, I don't know that we need to be duplicating all these services when, you know, and the taxpayer is paying into both entities when it's just literally a duplication of service.
Right. Counties could, you know, school districts could share one superintendent. They don't need a superintendent for every school district, especially out in the rural areas. Other things that local governments can do is they could do things like with purchasing, instead of each school district purchasing its equipment and supplies separately, you could do what they do in Minnesota, and that is all the school districts get together and say, okay, this is what we need for school supplies. This is what we need for school equipment. And they all go in and they buy by volume, and it's much cheaper that way than every school district ordering everything by itself.
That's a great idea. I mean, any business would do that, right? If you were in the private sector, you would totally look for ways to cut costs. Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, these are all great ideas. What else have you guys come up with on ways to minimize government spending and to like rein this whole thing in? Does it have to start at the local level, or is it gonna start like in the legislature? I almost think maybe local. What do you think?
Well, local government constitutionally is dependent upon state government, so it has to begin at the state level. But what we're seeing is a lot of local governments, they're all for the state funding underfunded and unfunded mandates. Like here in Douglas County, the state used to fund state prisoners in our local jails, and they don't do that anymore. So it's up to the local taxpayers to pay for that. If the counties were more vocal in getting the state to pay for more of their services, like they do in other states, even across the river in Iowa, then it would take some of the load off local property taxpayers.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. So
And
how there's the problem seems so huge. How long do you think before the people actually start feeling relief from this tax burden and this oppressive government? Like, how long do you think it's going to take?
after last night, this is what I think. You know, there's a lot of this going on. A lot of people complain. Oh, I hear about it all the time. Oh, why doesn't your group do something? And I ask them, well, do you want to help do something? Oh, no, I'm busy. Sorry, I can't help. It's cheap to complain and whine and cry about your property taxes. But we go down and testify at the legislature all the time. It's the same deal every week we were there, just this last session. There were bills on property tax relief where there were like 3 people testifying for the bill. Now, out of all the thousands of Nebraskans who complain about their property taxes and their utility rates and their income taxes and all their other taxes, senators actually presented really great bills for people to come down and testify or pick up the phone or call, send an email to your state senator. And this is what we hear all the time from our state senators. They say, Doug, 80 to 90% of the people who contact us want us to spend more of your money. 10% of the people are the taxpayers who actually complain. So it's easy to complain, but if people don't want to go down and testify at these hearings where these state senators present really great tax bills, one was to take all the utility taxes off your natural gas and electricity. Loads of states do that. We were the only people who showed up and testified, NTF members. There's another bill, Brad Von Gillern, great bill, which other states have implemented. He doctored it up a little bit, but generally what it said was, if the valuations go up 5%, your county has to decrease its property tax levy 5%. Hardly anybody showed up to support that bill, but you know who shows up to oppose those bills? It's the lobbyists for the cities and the counties and the school districts, and they all have the same sob story. Oh, we need all that property tax revenue. Oh, we need all that inheritance tax revenue. If we don't have it, we'll just have to raise our taxes more. We testified on the inheritance tax bill. They all came down there, these counties from NACO and everybody else, and they said, oh, we're going to have to raise property taxes if we don't have inheritance tax money, because they said they use the inheritance tax money to take the load off property tax money. They're liars. In Douglas County, they gave $500,000 to UNMC for one of its clinics. That's not even a county responsibility. That's a whole new entity over there, UNMC.
Wow.
But to answer your question directly, nothing's going to change until people quit talking so much and do something about it. And that's why we try to lobby people to be individual lobbyists so they can go to the legislature, go to their county board and city council and complain and make these elected officials afraid enough so they'll quit raising our property taxes.
Wow, Doug, that's the exact same thing. Like your organization and NFV, the same thing. We say you need to show up. And the kind of what my revelation here after last night too is, like, how bad does it have to get? Maybe people aren't hurting enough yet. When is it going to be enough? And there's a big group of people that have had enough and they're feeling the pain, but others, I don't know that they're feeling enough pain yet. And that's just really alarming, especially with the climate that we are in with inflation. But you got to show up. That's our thing, is you have to show up. You have to do something.
You'd be surprised. People call me and they don't know who to vote for. 2 days before the election, I get calls. People have to educate themselves and pay attention to the candidates who are fiscal conservatives, because the same people who complain are the same people who vote for the wrong people, who are raising their taxes, and people don't keep track of it. How stupid is that? But it's reality.
Yeah. Yeah. When really, if you look at it, you know, and you're in the 20% of people that showed up to vote in the primary yesterday, 1 in 5 people. I mean, wow. But I had this feeling a week ago. I was just talking to our executive director. I said, I feel like people are not engaged right now. I felt that last week. And then after seeing the results of people that showed up last night, I'm like, yep, that's exactly what I was feeling, that people were off to vacation and doing things and not even aware that there was an election.
Well, that's right. I think part of it is it's so tough for people just to make a living now. They're working 1.5, 2 jobs, and they don't take the time out to pay attention to politics. But I think the other pet peeve I have is you go to these rallies and these big gatherings of people, and you see a lot of people there, and they get all whooped up and excited. Oh yeah, we got to do this, we got to do that. And they listen to the speakers and they listen to the music, and everybody sees their friends and they have a good time. And then they go home and they don't do anything.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why at some point it's just talk, and you have to turn that talk into action. And how do you get people engaged? That's our big focus. And I think that's your focus as well, is to get people engaged, and like, how can you make a difference? And your voice matters.
Yeah, well, we teach seminars on how to lobby, but there's, how to lobby your city councilman is real simple. But I think a lot of people are just afraid to get up and talk. And I
Yeah,
think with the current political environment, unfortunately, I think a lot of people are afraid to get involved because they think maybe the FBI will visit their home, or they're going to be put on a blacklist, and they're just too chicken to do anything.
yeah. Well, freedom isn't free. And you know what? Our founding fathers, which that's what NFFE stands for, I mean, a lot of them lost everything. And I
They
guess, if we're not willing to lose everything, then what do we really have?
Well, people have to make a decision. Do they want to be, uh, conscientious people and take an active role, or do they want to be sheeple and just be herded around?
That's right. That's right. Well, this has been awesome, Doug. Do you have anything more to add regarding your group, or your thoughts on the Nebraska tax system and overhauling it?
Well, if anybody wants our white paper, I can email it to them free. Just email me at NE-taxpayers. That's like Nebraska, NE-taxpayers@gmail.com. And I will email them a copy of our 5-page tax plan. And if any of your people want to have us come out and give a seminar, we have seminars on how to lobby, and they're two parts. There's outlines, and we have PowerPoint presentations too. So we're available over the summer to do that, and we
That's
don't charge for it.
That's great. That's great. I know I had reached out to, when I first I think it was, I don't know if it was the university or the taxpayer stuff, but I had reached out to your group too. And I know that the response I got was, "Oh, you can join and help us." And at that point, my workload was so high with,
Yeah,
NFFB. I'm like, okay, I would totally do it if I didn't already have like maxed out. But seriously, if people are free, and if this is their passion about University Watch or taxpayers, totally reach out to Doug's group. You can make a difference, and you can show up at the Capitol. I'm sure their group would help you to testify and give you talking points on about taxes. I think that's how we're going to have to change the whole tax system.
right. We have people during the legislative session, they just tag along with us, and we tell them, you don't have to do anything, just follow us. And we visit state senators' offices, and they've gone to our seminars, and they say, okay, just follow us and do what we do. You go to the state senator's office, we introduce them. This is what you say, this is who you talk to in the office, this is how you testify, and they get the hang of it, and then they can learn how to do it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's how you get started.
Yep, everybody has to be active.
That's right. That's right. Well, this has been so great, Doug. You helped me, like everybody, you gather your own thought process, like on a lot of these legislative bills. And then you're like, I think I'm thinking about this correctly. And you just confirmed a lot of the things that after reading it was my takeaway. So we're kind of on the same page. And I think a lot of the people that are trying to get tax reform are. So this has been great. And I hope a lot of people in Nebraska learn something from this conversation, because that's really what it's all about, is we're just trying to educate people on taxation and how the system needs to get fixed.
Right. Well, thanks for having me on, Jeanne. And if you ever want me to come back for another Zoom meeting, just let me know.
I sure will. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Have a nice day.